This is Amy Chan from CakeDecoratingSchool.com, and if you like cake decorating, you're in the right place. Thanks for checking out this video on how to practice for improvement. It's a little bit different than some of our regular videos because we're mostly just going to be talking about ways you can focus your work and improve your skills. It's still going to be broken down into steps, so you can skip ahead or rewind and re-watch or listen to the parts you're interested in. Thanks for checking out this video on how to practice. In this one, we wanted to touch a little bit on how we practice to improve our skills. And we have a little kind of system that we use just to really help focus our work. So whether you're doing something like utilizing the great printout pages in our Practice With Me series, or you're working on an actual cake and you're working on some of your own projects, you can really focus that time and help improve to really give yourself a little goal. So there's a couple of steps that we go through when we do this. So I call them my steps to improvement. But the first one is to look at your work. So whether this is as you're actually doing it or as you've finished a project, or if you just want to do things like take photos of your work as you're going so that you have something to look at later and evaluate. That's going to be fantastic. Next is to pick a goal. So from that evaluation, we're going to pick a goal for ourselves. And then we're going to plan our next sessions based on that. So whether that's practice, where we're working on just techniques, or actual projects, we're going to include those goals in there so that we can actually work on those skills. Then it's volume. So you've done it once, keep going. Volume is what builds up your muscle memory. And finally, we're going to reevaluate. So as you're going through these next little steps, which are really the same because I like to separate them out, because I think sometimes people think, oh, I practice once and move on. Practice really takes multiple sessions, but as we go, we want to keep evaluating and starting back at the beginning and keep going through. And when you feel like you've improved enough, you can move on to your next set of goals. Our first step to improvement is evaluating our own work. So we want to look at it with a little bit of a critical eye. Now, not too critical. You don't want to beat yourself up. You want to focus on not only the things that you want to improve, but also the things that you're doing better. So just kind of keep that in mind. Be gentle with ourselves. We're looking to point out things where we want to improve, not just bash on ourselves. So whether that's you finished a project and you're looking it over and you're kind of picking out things where you could have done them better or made slight improvements, or you're just taking photos that you can go back and look at later, you want to make sure you're doing that every time you do a project or a practice session. And we just want to kind of keep a record of those. If you can always just keep a mental record. I like to actually keep a little log or journal. So whether it's a checklist or a little notebook, I have a nice little notebook where I keep a lot of my ideas. So whether that's ideas for cakes, ideas for recipes, color palettes, and even things that I want to be actively working on, I have a nice little journal. So the next time I do something, I don't actually have to focus on remembering all that stuff. I have a nice little list for myself that I can reference back to. And so the other thing to really touch on is don't be afraid of your mistakes. We're all human, we're all gonna make them. And as one of my instructors told me in culinary school, mistakes are how you learn. So don't be afraid of them. Don't feel like you're the only one who makes them. We all do. Just kind of keep track of things, little problems you're having, little areas you need to improve, whether it's individual skills or kind of whole things, like maybe you want the actual appearance of your cake to look better or something like that. And that is where you're going to start to improve because you're going to know what really needs to get better. And it starts by kind of acknowledging that, but also don't really be too hard on yourself. If you're just beginning this journey, there's going to be lots of areas you need to improve on. Pick the one that you feel like needs the most attention kind of critically. So think of it as triaging. That'll make the biggest improvement in your overall work, and start there and kind of move forward. Next, we're going to pick a goal. Out of all the things you listed for yourself when you're evaluating your work, pick the thing you feel is most important. And I usually start with the ones that I feel like will make the biggest impact on my work, but you can really start anywhere. If you need to, if this feels overwhelming, pick something small. So whether it's a single skill that you want to work on based on your self-evaluation, or you just want to start doing them one at a time, do as many as you're comfortable with. There's some projects and activities, like let's say building up your actual cake, where it kind of helps to work on a lot of things at once. And as an example, think of when you're icing a cake, things like starting with nice level layers, getting the amount of filling even and level, and then working on a nice smooth and level top, and then the sides, and then the transition between the two. It's something you can work on all those points within a single project, and it's not that overwhelming or hard because you can work on them all at one time and then just kind of rate yourself on each of those afterwards. And then there's other things like if you're just doing a practice session where you're doing skills, where it's really easy to work on an individual skill or work on one skill at a time, like just making stars or just making rosettes and working on each of those parts and then moving on as you feel you've gotten comfortable with them. So you can start with working on a whole list of things, or you can just start with one thing. But as you go and as you get more comfortable, it'll be a little easier to kind of work on and keep track of working on multiple different points at once. And like anything, the more you practice, not only this, getting better at your work, but practice in general, the quicker you'll improve and the more you'll be able to handle. Now we're going to just do a sample of some practice and kind of working through the different elements. And you can do this really with any technique, but we want to break it down into the key points. So I've picked something simple. I'm just doing stars with a 21 tip. And first it's going to be how I'm holding my bag. So think straight up and down. For a lot of things that you're piping, that's going to be the angle of the bag and the position the back of the bag is in. So those little clock positions we give you in a lot of videos and getting that correct first. And then it's going to be the correct height off of the surface. And then we want to focus on consistent size and the fullness, and finally a clean finish. So I'm going to kind of work through these at each stage and kind of correct and give myself feedback. When you feel comfortable, move on to the next one. So this is a bit on how we break down individual skills. And this is a really simple one to do it, but you can also do it for any of your other skills. Think rosettes, shells, even your flowers. Working on each individual part and each individual step so that you're really reinforcing that behavior and it becomes muscle memory for you. So the first one is holding that bag straight up and down. And so we just want to hold it, give ourselves a squeeze, and make a nice star. And that's a really decent one. The key with holding it straight up and down is that's how your frosting is flowing out, and we want it to flow out nice and evenly. If we were holding it at an angle, you would see it kind of pushes the frosting out to one side. We then have a kind of uneven star. So if you're not sure exactly what you need to do or what it looks like when you need to do something, you can always purposely do it incorrectly to give yourself a little bit of a guide. So you can see now I'm holding it off to the left, and those are kind of uneven. They flow outwards instead of coming down and ballooning out evenly. So the key with holding that bag straight up and down is in part to get a nice even spread on our frosting. The next thing we really want to make sure we know about is the height. Because we're doing a nice little star, it can't be touching the surface, and it also can't be up too high. So I want to give myself little errors. So if I'm touching the surface, it's really flat and it actually gives it a void in the center. If I'm too high up, so we want to really come up high to really exaggerate it, you can see it pipes a line of frosting, it doesn't connect, and then it gives us a little swirl. So those are good indications that we're either holding it too close or too far away. So once we have our little indicators that we're doing something wrong, I'm just going to go in here, correct myself, and do it right. So get a nice idea of just how far away from the surface I need to be. And obviously, I'm not doing too many here. When you're actually practicing, do a whole bunch. I worked with someone once who said if you do something 100 times, you're pretty much learning how to do it. And that was in something different. It was for pottery, but they were talking about how repetition is really how you learn, because you're teaching your body by repeating something over and over again. And then the next thing we want to work on is a consistent size and fullness. So we want to make sure that they're all relatively the same amount of size. And so just give yourself a little key, like something that's too small, it looks too petite, it doesn't take up a lot of area. Something that's too big, you can see it'll start to ruffle. And so that's going to give us a very uneven and inconsistent look. So we want to make sure we get a nice fullness, but we stop before it starts to ruffle. And for this, for size, I like to actually talk to myself. I think about it in terms of seconds, or I make a little song to myself, and that's to kind of get timing for myself. So think about it a bit like dance, where you're counting 5, 6, 7, 8, so everybody goes all together. You're kind of making sure all your little minions on there go together. And I just think about stars as a nice 1 and stop. So it kind of gives me a nice little sense of timing. So think like a single second. Some might be a 2 count, some techniques might be a 3 count if you want to hold it longer, but that'll give you a nice, even, consistent timing so that all of your little details look the same and look very similar. And that's a great way to ensure that you get a consistent size on things. And then finally, it's a clean finish. And what we want with our stars is to avoid a peak, right? So a little Hershey kiss there. And we do that by stopping our pressure on the bag. And this can be one of those things that really gets people because you get nervous and for whatever reason, your brain doesn't want to tell your hand to stop squeezing. So for that, I find the easiest way to get myself to stop squeezing is just to actually physically let go. So you can see my fingers just released on the bag. And then when we pull away, that should give us a nice blunt finish there, maybe just with the tiniest of little peaks, but it'll give us a nice consistent look and keep them from being too tall. So that's that last key element that I want to work on to make sure I have beautiful stars. And once I kind of work through all of that, I want to make sure I go ahead and really reinforce that, do every single step, and make sure I'm practicing each of these as I go through. Talk to yourself. Bag is straight. We're doing consistent timing. We're not too close. We're not too far away. And we have a nice finish. So make sure as you're going through, you're not just working through every step of a technique or each step of a project that needs help or work, but that you're really going through and working on each one of them. Give yourself cues to what the wrong way of doing something looks like so that you really make sure you're doing the right way. And then make sure you go through and practice quite a bit. So if you're thinking about techniques and you're like, well, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, that's a really good time to go back to any of your references. So whether it's videos that we've made that you're using, your various books or other resources, or even videos on other channels, whatever will help you key in and pick up those key elements and give you the information you need to do them correctly. So sometimes when you're working on things, especially more complicated things, you might have to go back and do a little research to give yourself the keys to making those tasks and each part successful. Repetition. I make this a separate step just because it's so important. Repetition is going to be the key to getting better faster. The more you work on something, the quicker you're going to get better at it, and the more you're going to improve. So anytime I'm working on particular skills or maybe a set of skills, I try to work them in wherever I can on projects. And if I need to, make some nice individual focused little practice sessions where maybe I'm just working on a practice board and working on individual skills. But the more you focus on those things you want to improve on, the better you're going to get faster. So I like to make it a separate step. After an initial practice session, I like to make sure I'm working those skills in anywhere I can, just kind of sneaking them in on projects. If I'm focusing on something like maybe stars or rosettes, I'm going to cover a whole cake in them because the more you do something, the quicker you'll get better at it. And finally, we're going to reevaluate. This is going to start the loop over for us. So as we're going, as we're practicing, make sure you're either making notes to yourself in a little notebook or taking pictures so that you can go back and look at your work later and reevaluate. And it's really important here, especially not to just be critical of your work, but also to make notes of any place you've improved. We don't want to just kind of beat on ourselves and kind of always be talking about negatives. We always want to talk about where we've improved as well. So we're building ourselves up and charting that progress, and you can see it happening. Because if you can say, wow, I'm really getting more consistent and better with X, Y, Z, and I still need to just maybe work on this one thing, you're really able to track your progress, and you're really able to give yourselves those little high fives and say, wow, I'm doing great. And it also allows us to look at it critically and say, these are the areas I still need improvement on, or maybe you've just hit all your goals and it's time to move on to new things. So to maybe daydream a little bit, do a little bit of scrolling on the internet and find new things that you want to learn and branch out and grow. And this is a great way to give yourself that time to kind of reevaluate, decide if it's time to go back and work on a few finer points, or it's time to move forward and try some new stuff for yourself. So that is a nice little final step. It can feed back into the original and you can be working on the same things, or it can be a nice little kind of nod to yourself that you've really improved a lot and it's time to move on to new areas. So it's always good to do a little reevaluation after you've done some work and kind of give yourself a little praise and also set some new goals for yourself. And that's really how you're going to keep moving, keep growing, and keep getting better at cake decorating. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like more about the cake decorating materials and equipment we use, or just some inspirational videos about cake decorating itself, you can follow us on Insta or YouTube at Cake Decorating School. If you'd like to know more about yearly membership and what it entails, you can go to www.cakedecoratingschool.com for more information. And if you're interested in these products, you can check the links in the description.